My son thought I knew nothing about his plan to take my mother's estate. And the worst part wasn't the plan. It was how calm he sounded while doing it. Like he had already convinced himself he was right. My name is Robert Hayes, and I've spent my whole life fixing problems quietly. The kind that don't get talked about at dinner tables. The kind families pretend don't exist. And standing in my kitchen that Thursday morning, I felt something familiar settle in my chest. Not anger, not yet. Something colder. Recognition. If you've ever had a moment where you realize someone close to you isn't who you thought they were, you already know where this is going. But before we get into it, do me a quick favor. Hit subscribe and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is right now. I read them all, and I appreciate every single one of you. Now let me tell you how I found out. It started with a phone call from my mother. She's 82, still sharp, still living alone in the same house she's had for over 50 years. The kind of woman people underestimate because she doesn't raise her voice. When I picked up, she didn't say hello. She just said my name. Robert. That was enough. I turned the stove off immediately. What happened? I asked, keeping my voice steady. With her, you don't panic. You listen. Did Daniel tell you about the party? She asked. My son Daniel. My grandson's celebration last weekend. A big backyard event, something they had been talking about for weeks. No, I said slowly. I thought it was Saturday. Why? She paused just long enough for me to understand this wasn't small. Nobody invited me, she said. And just like that, something shifted inside me. Not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet click, like a lock turning into place. People don't forget their own mother. Not for something like that, not unless there's a reason. I called Daniel before I even hung up. He picked up too fast. Dad, hey. He sounded like he'd been expecting it. Why wasn't Grandma invited? I asked. No warm-up, no small talk, just straight to it. Silence. Not confusion, not surprise. Calculation. I could hear it. Dad, it wasn't really a family thing. Just some friends from school, he said. And right then, I heard another voice in the background. Low, controlled, guiding him. I didn't need the words. I knew exactly who it was. His wife, Emily. She had that way of steering conversations without ever sounding like she was in control. We'll come by later this week, Daniel added quickly. We'll explain everything in person. Later this week? I repeated. Dad, please, he said, softer. Then the line went dead. I stood there in my kitchen, staring at my phone, that heavy feeling building in my chest. Because this wasn't about a party, not even close. I called my mother back. They're coming later this week, I told her. They want to explain in person. She made a small sound, the kind that means she already understands more than you do. Robert, she said. How long have you known Emily? Long enough, I answered. Then you already know, she said. And she was right. I did. There had always been something about Emily. Too polished, too careful, always saying the right things but never quite meaning them. I had ignored it for years, told myself I was being unfair, that Daniel was happy, and that was enough. I was wrong. What my mother said next turned suspicion into certainty. There was a lawyer at that party, she said. I didn't speak for a second. A lawyer? I repeated. Yes, she said, leather folder and all. They all went inside for about an hour, left the kids outside. When they came back out, Daniel looked like he'd just been told something serious, and Emily looked like she had just won something. That's when I knew exactly what was happening. Not the details yet, but the direction. People don't bring lawyers to family parties unless they're planning something. And they don't leave the grandmother off the guest list, unless she's the target. I didn't say anything for a few seconds after that, not because I didn't understand what she meant, but because I understood it too well. A lawyer, a closed-door meeting, and my mother, left out on purpose. "Mom," I said finally, keeping my voice low, careful. "You know what I have to ask." She didn't hesitate. "They're going to try to declare me incompetent, aren't they?" And just like that, everything locked into place. Not a theory, not a suspicion. A plan. My own son sitting in a room with a lawyer, talking about taking control of his grandmother's estate like it was paperwork. Like she wasn't even in the room anymore. I walked over to the sink and stared out the window for a second, trying to keep my breathing steady. Because anger would come later. Right now, I needed clarity. "When did you figure this out?" I asked. "Sunday morning," she said, after Shirley called me. "And what did you do?" "I already told you," she replied calmly. "I made some calls." That tone again. Not fear, not panic, control. The kind that comes from someone who has been underestimated her entire life and learned to use it. "Who did you call?" I asked. A pause. Then, "Emily Carter, estate attorney, downtown office, 4th floor." I turned from the window slowly. "You already had a lawyer?" "I keep things, Robert," she said. "You know that." And I did. That woman still had birthday cards from 20 years ago tucked into drawers like they mattered. Of course she had a lawyer's card. Of course she remembered exactly where it was. "When did you go see her?" "Monday morning," she said. "First appointment." I told her everything. Every detail. And what did she say? Another small pause. The kind that means the next sentence matters. She said your son and his wife had already retained legal counsel. The words landed heavier than I expected. Already retained. This wasn't a thought. It wasn't a discussion. It was in motion. "Who?" I asked. "Daniel Pierce. Office out in West Des Moines." And then she added, almost casually, "They've started the process." My grip tightened on the edge of the counter. "Started what process?" "Contesting my mental competency," she said. Just like that. Like she was reading it off a grocery list. I didn't speak. Outside, somewhere down the street, a lawnmower started up. Normal sound, ordinary day. Nothing about this was ordinary anymore. "They're saying you can't manage your own estate?" I said slowly. "Apparently," she replied. Though I did find it interesting. I was the one who drove myself downtown, met with an attorney, and understood every word of the conversation. While your son needed a week to gather the courage to explain himself, I almost smiled at that. Almost. "Mom," I said, turning back toward the table, "I need you to listen to me carefully. What they're trying to do, if they push it the wrong way, it's not just unethical. It can backfire hard." "I know," she said simply. Emily explained everything, and then she added, just a little softer, "I've already handled it. That stopped me." "Handled it how?" I asked. There was a small sound, ceramic against wood. She had set her cup down, the kind of precise movement that always meant she was about to say something final. "We'll get to that," she said. Thursday arrived exactly how I expected it to. Quiet on the surface, heavy underneath. The kind of day where you already know what's coming. You just don't know how bad it's going to get. Daniel texted me that morning. "We'll be there around 2, Dad." Period at the end. Not an emoji, not a smile. Just a period. The punctuation of someone who had rehearsed every word. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Instead, I spent the morning doing what I've always done best. I didn't argue. I didn't panic. I prepared. I made 2 calls, both short, both very specific. Then I sat at my kitchen table, the same one Daniel had done homework at when he was a kid, and waited. 2:13 p.m. I heard the car pull into the driveway. I didn't move right away. I let them sit there for a few seconds. Let them feel that small stretch of silence. Then I stood up and walked to the door. Daniel stepped out first. He looked tired. Not physically, mentally, like he hadn't slept well in days. That told me everything I needed to know. He knew something was wrong. He just didn't know how wrong. Emily stepped out after him, composed, controlled. That same careful expression she always wore. The one that said everything was under control, even when it wasn't. I opened the door before they could knock. "Dad," Daniel said, stepping forward. I hugged him. It was real. That was the part that made this harder than it needed to be. Because underneath all of this, he was still my son. "Come in," I said. I made coffee. Emily smiled, leaned in, kissed my cheek. "Thank you for seeing us, Robert. We really wanted to talk in person." "Of course you did," I thought. We sat down at the table, same chairs, but nothing about this felt the same anymore. Daniel looked at me, then at his hands, then back at me again. He was stalling, waiting for the right words, or maybe the least damaging ones. "Dad," he started, "we want to talk to you about Grandma." I nodded slowly. "Go ahead." He took a breath. "We're worried about her." There it was, not a surprise, not even creative, just the opening line they'd rehearsed. Emily stepped in smoothly, right on cue. "She's alone in that house, Robert, managing significant assets without any real oversight, and some of the decisions she's been making." I leaned back slightly. "What decisions?" I asked. Just enough push to throw off the rhythm. Emily blinked once. Small, quick. She hadn't expected resistance this early. "Well," she said carefully, "she's made some financial choices recently that raised concerns." "Concerns for who?" I asked. Daniel shifted in his seat. "Dad, nobody's saying she can't do what she wants. We just think there should be some structure, some protection." "Protection," I repeated. And then I looked directly at him. "Is that why you had a lawyer at Ethan's party?" Silence. Immediate. Total. That was the moment everything changed. The silence didn't just sit in the room. It pressed down on it. Daniel froze. Not completely, but enough. His shoulders tightened, his jaw set just a little too hard. I'd seen that look before. When he was a kid, it meant he'd been caught. Emily didn't freeze. She adjusted. That was the difference. "Who told you that?" she asked, her voice calm, controlled. Too controlled. I didn't answer her right away. I kept my eyes on my son. "Daniel," I said quietly, not looking at her at all. "How much of this did you actually know about?" He swallowed, looked at Emily. Just for a second, but it was enough. That one glance told me everything I needed to know. He didn't know all of it, not even close. "Dad, we were just trying to—" "Stop," I said, not loud, not angry, just enough to cut him off. Because whatever came next, I wanted it clean. No excuses. No script. Emily leaned forward slightly. "Robert, this isn't what you think it is." I almost smiled at that. "It's exactly what I think it is," I said. "You brought a lawyer into a family event. You had a closed-door meeting. And now you're sitting here telling me you're concerned about my mother's decisions." I paused. That's not concern. That's positioning. That hit. I saw it in her eyes. Just a flicker, but it was there. Daniel shifted again. "Dad, it's not like that." Then tell me what it's like, I said, finally turning to him fully. Because right now, it looks like you're trying to take control of your grandmother's estate, without her even knowing. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. Because there wasn't a clean version of this. There wasn't a version that didn't sound exactly like what it was. Emily stepped in again, faster this time. We're trying to protect the family's future, she said. That's all this is. Protect the family, I repeated. And I leaned forward slightly, lowering my voice. From who? That's when the composure cracked. Not fully, but enough. Just a slight tightening around her eyes. A delay before her next word. From poor decision-making, she said finally. Your mother is 82 years old, Robert. She's managing significant assets on her own and it's her money. I cut in, calm, flat, final. She stopped. Daniel looked between us, caught in the middle of something he clearly didn't know how to control anymore. Dad, we just thought... No, I said. You didn't think. You planned. That landed harder than anything else so far, because it was true. And we all knew it. I let the silence sit for a second. Then I reached for my coffee, took a slow sip, and set it back down. Here's what you don't understand, I said, keeping my voice steady. My mother already knows. That changed everything. Daniel looked up immediately. What? Emily didn't move, but I saw it. That tiny shift, that instant recalculation behind her eyes. She knew what that meant, knew what it could mean. She knows about the lawyer, I continued. She knows about the meeting, and she knows exactly what you were trying to do. Daniel's face went pale. Dad, She met with her own attorney Monday morning, I said, cutting him off again. Downtown office. First appointment. The silence this time was different. Heavier, because now they weren't controlling the conversation anymore. Now they were reacting. I don't know what she told you, Emily said carefully. But, I know exactly what she was told, I replied. And I leaned forward just enough to make sure she understood this wasn't a guess. Your lawyer, Daniel Pierce, West Des Moines. That name ring a bell? That did it. Daniel turned to her fully this time. You hired someone? He asked, his voice low, confused, hurt. That was the moment I had been waiting for. Not the argument, not the confrontation, the fracture. Emily didn't answer right away, because there wasn't a good answer. It was just, precaution, she said finally. Precaution, I repeated. You mean building a case to declare my mother legally incompetent? Daniel looked like he'd just been hit with something he didn't see coming. Wait, what? He said, looking between us. That's what this is about? I didn't answer him. I didn't need to. He already knew. You didn't tell him, I said quietly, looking straight at Emily. That wasn't a question. That was a statement. And for the first time since they walked into my house, she didn't have control of the room. Daniel leaned back in his chair slowly, like the weight of it was finally settling in. You said we were just helping her organize things, he said. His voice had changed, less certain, more real. Emily turned to him. Daniel, no, he said, sharper now. You said it was just paperwork. You said, that's enough. I said, not for her, for him. Because this wasn't about tearing him down. Not completely. Not yet. I looked at my son, and for a second, I didn't see the man sitting in front of me. I saw the kid who used to sit at this same table, asking me for help with homework, trusting me to tell him what was right. And now here we were. Dad, he said, quieter this time. I didn't know it was like that. I believe you, I said, and I meant it. That was the problem. He wasn't the architect of this. He was the one being moved, and that made this mess a lot more complicated than I wanted it to be. I sat back in my chair and let out a slow breath. "There's one more thing you should know," I said, and this time, both of them were listening. Really listening. My mother didn't just talk to a lawyer, she made changes. I let that sit for a second. Let it sink in. "What kind of changes?" Emily asked. Her voice was still controlled, but tighter now. "Careful. Strategic. The kind of tone you use when you realize you're no longer ahead." I shook my head slightly. "I don't know the details," I said. "She didn't tell me." And then I added, just enough to make sure it landed. "She said her finances are her business." That was the moment it flipped completely, because now they understood what that meant. Whatever they had been planning was already too late. Nobody spoke for a few seconds after that. Not because there was nothing to say, but because everything that could be said had already been said. Daniel sat there, staring at the table, his hands clasped together like he was trying to hold something steady that had already slipped. Emily didn't look at him. She was thinking. I could see it in the way her eyes moved slightly, not panicked, calculating, looking for a way to recover something that was already gone. I let the silence sit. I didn't rush it. Because silence does something arguments never can. It forces people to sit with the truth. Finally, Daniel exhaled slowly. "Dad, I'm sorry." It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't defensive. It was quiet, real. And that hit harder than anything else so far. I looked at him for a moment. I didn't say it was okay, because it wasn't. But I didn't tear into him either, because this wasn't finished yet. There was still more to come. "You should talk to her," I said finally. "Your grandmother. Not me, not lawyers, her." He nodded slowly. Yeah, I will." Emily didn't say anything. That was new. She had been leading every conversation up to this point. Now she was quiet, watching, waiting. That told me she hadn't given up. Not yet. They left about 20 minutes later. No arguments, no raised voices, just that heavy, controlled exit people make when they know they've already lost ground, but haven't accepted it yet. I watched them pull out of the driveway, didn't wave, didn't need to. Then I closed the door, walked back into the kitchen, and stood there for a second, letting the room settle back into something that almost felt normal. It didn't last. My phone buzzed on the counter. A message from my mother. Sunday, 4 p.m., dinner. That was it. No explanation, no details, just a time. I stared at the message for a second. Then I smiled. Not because it was funny, because I understood exactly what it meant. She was ready. And whatever she had done, whatever changes she had made, Sunday was when everyone was going to find out. I texted back one word. "I'll be there." The rest of the week passed quietly on the surface, but underneath, everything was moving. Daniel texted once, said he'd spoken to her, didn't say how it went. I didn't ask. Some conversations you don't interrupt. You let them play out. Emily didn't reach out at all. That was interesting. Either she was regrouping, or she was planning something else. Either way, it didn't matter anymore, because the control had already shifted. Sunday came slow, the kind of slow that builds pressure instead of easing it. By the time I pulled up to my mother's house, I already knew two things. First, Daniel was there. His car was in the driveway. Second, there was another car, smaller, older. I recognized it immediately. My grandson, Ethan. I sat in my truck for a few seconds, just looking at it, processing. She invited him. Of course she did. That changed everything. Because whatever was about to happen, It wasn't just going to stay between us anymore. It was going to be seen. I stepped out of the truck, walked up to the house, and let myself in. Family doesn't knock there. Never has. Daniel was already at the table, sitting straight, hands folded, like he was waiting for something he couldn't avoid. Ethan sat next to him, scrolling on his phone, completely relaxed. Completely unaware. And Emily. She was across from them. Perfect posture, calm face, that same controlled expression. But this time I could see it clearly. It wasn't confidence anymore. It was tension. My mother was at the stove, stirring something, like it was just another Sunday. "Robert," she said without turning around, "hang your coat. Dinner's in 20. I hung my coat, sat down, and for a moment, nobody spoke. Ethan finally looked up. "Grandpa, hey, smells amazing in here." I nodded. "Hey kid, how's school?" "Good," he said. "Got an extension on a paper, so I'm basically winning at life right now." My mother smiled slightly. "Hard work pays off," she said. The irony in that sentence didn't go unnoticed. Not by me, not by Daniel, definitely not by Emily. Dinner started like nothing was wrong. That was the part that made it worse. Conversation, food, small talk, all of it normal on the surface. Underneath, it felt like everything was sitting on a fault line. I watched Daniel carefully. He barely touched his food. Ethan ate like nothing in the world could bother him. And Emily. She played her role perfectly, engaged, polite, controlled. But I could see it now. The slight delay before she spoke. The way her eyes kept moving, checking, adjusting, waiting, and then my mother set her fork down. Not loud, not dramatic, just a small, precise movement. But it cut through everything. "Ethan," she said gently, "I have something for you." He looked up, surprised. "For me?" She reached into her cardigan pocket and pulled out an envelope. Cream-colored, sealed. She slid it across the table toward him. "Open it, sweetheart." And just like that, everything shifted. Ethan picked up the envelope like it didn't weigh anything. That's the thing about moments like this. They never feel heavy until they land. He turned it over once, glanced at his dad, then at me. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. "Open it," my mother said again, calm as ever. He slid his finger under the seal and pulled the paper out. I watched his face the entire time. At first, nothing, just casual. Then his eyes slowed, focused, his brows pulled together slightly. And then it hit him. "Grandma," he said, looking up. "This is a check." "It is," she said simply. His voice changed. "This is a really big check." "Your grandfather worked hard," she replied. "So did I. And now you're going to finish what you started. That's all this is." Ethan looked between all of us, confused now. "Did you guys know about this?" he asked. "No," Daniel said immediately. "Too fast, too honest. That was the truth." Emily didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Her face said enough. "There's a condition," my mother added. Ethan straightened slightly. "Okay. It goes into an account in your name only," she said. "Not joint, not shared. Yours. Only yours." She paused, just long enough. "It's already been set up, transfers in motion. The check is just for formality." That's when the air in the room changed. Completely. Because now it wasn't theory anymore. It wasn't planning. It was done. Locked in. Untouchable. Daniel leaned forward slightly. "Mom, what is this?" he asked, still trying to catch up, still behind. My mother folded her hands on the table. "I updated my estate this week," she said. "Clean, direct, no emotion. Everything has been restructured, properly, legally, completely. Emily's posture shifted just a fraction, almost invisible. But I saw it. That was the moment she realized. There was nothing left to control. "What do you mean restructured?" she asked carefully. My mother turned her head slightly toward her. "It means," she said, "that everything your husband thought he understood, he did not." Silence. Thick. Heavy. Final. Daniel looked at her, then back at his mother. "Mom, what exactly did you do?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached for her glass, took a small sip, and set it back down. The same precise movement, the same control. Then she looked directly at him. "I protected what your father built," she said, "and I protected who it was meant for." That landed. Hard. Ethan was still holding the paper in his hand, but now he wasn't looking at it anymore. He was looking at his father. Slowly, carefully, like he was trying to understand something he hadn't seen before. "Dad, what's going on?" he asked. Daniel didn't answer. He couldn't, because there was no version of this that didn't break something. Emily stepped in. She had to. "Ethan, your grandmother is just making sure things are organized." "No," my mother said, not raising her voice, not interrupting harshly, just stopping it, clean, final. "That's not what this is." And for the first time since she walked into that house, Emily didn't have a response ready. "I know about the lawyer," my mother continued. "I know about the meeting, and I know what you were preparing to do." Ethan turned fully toward his parents now. "What lawyer?" he asked. The question hung there. No one answered him. "What meeting?" he said again, slower this time. Different tone, the kind that doesn't accept silence as an answer. Daniel closed his eyes for a second. Just one, then opened them again. "Ethan," he started, but the words didn't come easy, because now there was no script left. "You used my party?" Ethan said quietly. That was it. Not yelling, not anger, just that one sentence, and it cut deeper than anything else that had been said all day. Emily tried. It wasn't like that. "You used my party," he repeated, same tone, same weight, like he was making sure it was real. She stopped, because there was no way around that. I sat there and watched it happen, not stepping in, not stopping it, because this wasn't mine to control. This was the consequence. Daniel leaned forward, his voice lower now, honest, fragile. We thought it would be better to handle things early, to make sure everything was secure. Ethan didn't look at him the same way anymore. "You mean take control," he said, and just like that, it was all out in the open. No strategy, no positioning, just truth. Raw and uncomfortable. My mother sat back slightly, watching, not satisfied, not angry, just finished, because she had already won this before any of us sat down at that table. The rest of the conversation didn't need to be loud. It didn't need to be dramatic. It just needed to be real. And real is always heavier than anything else. No one raised their voice after that. They didn't need to. Everything that mattered had already been said, and somehow, that made it worse. Ethan sat there, still holding the paper, but now it hung loosely in his hand like it didn't belong to him anymore. He wasn't looking at the check. He was looking at his father. Really looking, like he was seeing something for the first time. Daniel noticed it. Of course he did. You can feel that kind of shift without anyone saying a word. "Ethan," he said quietly. But there was nothing after that. No explanation that didn't sound like a lie. No version of this that didn't feel like betrayal. My mother didn't interrupt. She didn't rush to fill the silence. She just let it sit there, exactly where it needed to be. Because some lessons don't land when you soften them. They land when you leave them alone. Finally, Ethan exhaled slowly and leaned back in his chair. "So this whole time," he said, not finishing the sentence. He didn't have to. We all knew how it ended. Daniel rubbed his hands together, staring down at the table. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this," he muttered. That line hit something in me. Not anger. Not yet. Something closer to disappointment. Because that's what people say when their plan doesn't work. Not when it was wrong. I leaned forward slightly. "What exactly was it supposed to look like?" I asked. Calm. Direct. No edge in my voice, but no room to hide either. He didn't answer right away. Emily did. "We were trying to prevent a situation where things could spiral later," she said. "Keep everything stable." I nodded once. "Stable," I repeated, and I looked straight at my son. "By taking control away from her before she even knew you were trying." Daniel winced slightly. Just enough. That told me the truth was landing now, not before. "We thought it would be easier this way," he said. "Easier for who?" I asked. He didn't answer, because there was only one honest answer to that question, and it wasn't one he wanted to say out loud. Ethan shook his head slowly. "You didn't even talk to her first," he said. "That one hurt. I saw it." Daniel looked up at him, and for the first time since they walked in, he looked small. "I was going to," he said. "You already had a lawyer," Ethan cut in. "You already had a plan. That's not going to talk. That's already deciding." Silence again. But this time it didn't feel tense. It felt final. Like something had settled into place that wasn't going to move again. My mother reached for her glass, took a small sip, and set it back down. The same calm, controlled motion. Then she looked at Ethan. "You don't need to carry this," she said gently. "This isn't yours." Ethan shook his head slightly. "It kind of is," he said. "You gave me this." He held up the paper just a little, and they used me. That was the moment Daniel broke. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a quiet collapse in the way he leaned forward, elbows on the table, face in his hands for a second. "I didn't see it," he said. "I swear, I didn't see it like that." I believed him. That was the part that made it complicated. Because he wasn't the one who built this, but he walked into it anyway. And that still counted. I stood up slowly, walked over to the sink, and turned the water on. Not because I needed to wash anything, just to give the moment space. Sometimes people need a second where no one is looking at them. Behind me, I could hear the shift. Chairs moving slightly. Breathing changing. Realizing. My mother spoke again, calm as ever. "What matters now is what you do next," she said. "Not what you thought you were doing." Daniel didn't respond right away. Then finally, quietly, "I'll fix it." That made me pause. Not because I didn't believe he meant it, but because I knew some things don't get fixed. They just get carried differently after that. I turned off the water and looked back at him. "This isn't something you fix with a phone call," I said. "This is something you sit with. You understand. And then, maybe, you do better." He nodded slowly. "Yeah, I know." Ethan stood up after that, not abruptly. Just done. "I'm going to step outside for a minute," he said. Needed air. Nobody stopped him. The door opened, closed, silence again. But this one felt different, lighter somehow, like the worst of it had already happened. Emily finally moved, shifting in her chair, sitting a little straighter. She hadn't said anything in a while. That told me more than anything else. The control she thought she had was gone, and she knew it. I looked at her for a second, then back at my son, and in that moment, I realized something I hadn't fully accepted before. This wasn't about winning. Not really. This was about seeing clearly. And once you see someone clearly, you don't go back to who they were before. The house felt quieter after that. Not empty, just different. Like something had been removed that wasn't coming back. Daniel stayed at the table for a while longer. Didn't say much. Didn't try to explain anything else. That told me more than any apology could. When people finally understand what they've done, they stop talking. My mother stood up first, slow and steady, like she had all the time in the world. She began clearing plates, same as every Sunday, like nothing had happened. That was her way. Not ignoring it, just not needing to prove anything anymore. I moved to help her, always did, habit built over decades. You didn't have to do all that, I said quietly as I picked up the dishes. She glanced at me, just for a second. I did, she replied. Simple. Final. And she was right. This wasn't about punishment. It was about protection. About making sure the next move didn't exist. Daniel eventually stood up. Walked over slowly. Mom? He started. She didn't turn around right away. Then she did. You'll be all right, she said before he could finish. Not forgiving, not dismissing. Just placing the responsibility back where it belonged. He nodded. That was all he could do. Because there wasn't anything else left to say that mattered. A few minutes later, the front door opened again. Ethan came back in. His face looked different. Not angry, not confused, just older. Like something had shifted inside him that wasn't going to shift back. You okay? I asked. He nodded once. Yeah. He looked at his dad, then at me, then back at my mother. I'm going to hold on to this, he said, lifting the envelope slightly. Not just the money. All of it. The lesson. My mother gave a small smile. That's the part that matters, she said. He nodded again. Then he walked over and hugged her. Tight. Real. That kind of hug doesn't happen unless something has changed for good. Daniel watched it, didn't move, and I could see it in his face. He understood what he had almost broken. Not just trust, not just family. Something deeper. Something that doesn't always come back once it's gone. They left not long after that. No arguments, no slammed doors. Just quiet steps, careful words, and a weight that followed them out of the house. I walked them to the door. Daniel paused before stepping out. Dad, he said. I looked at him. He didn't finish the sentence, didn't need to. I gave him a small nod. Not forgiveness, not yet. Just acknowledgement. That was all he was getting for now. He understood that. They drove off. I stood there for a second, watching the car disappear down the street, then closed the door and leaned back against it. The house was quiet again. Familiar. Safe. My mother was already back at the table, folding her napkin like it was just another Sunday. You always let people underestimate you, I said. She looked up at me, calm as ever. It saves time, she replied. I laughed under my breath. Yeah, it does. I grabbed my coat a few minutes later. Heading out, I said. She nodded. Drive safe, same as always. Like nothing had changed, but everything had. I stepped outside into the evening air, colder now, quieter, and as I walked to my truck, I thought about my son. Not the man sitting at that table today, but the boy he used to be. And I realized something I probably should have understood a long time ago. You don't lose your child in one moment. Still, you lose them slowly, in the choices they make when they think no one is watching. And sometimes, the only thing you can do is make sure they finally are. I got in the truck, started the engine, and sat there for a second before pulling away. No anger, no satisfaction, just clarity. The kind that stays with you long after everything else fades. If you've made it this far, do me one last favor. Hit like, subscribe, and drop a comment. What would you have done in my place? I read every single one, and I'll see you in the next story. It didn't end that night. Not really. Things like that never do. The next few weeks were quieter than usual. Daniel called a couple of times, not long conversations, not comfortable ones either, just short check-ins, careful words, like he was trying to figure out how to speak again without breaking something else. I answered. Every time. But I didn't make it easy, because this wasn't something you smooth over in a week or a month. Trust doesn't come back just because you say the right things. It comes back when your actions stop looking like a plan and start looking like respect. Emily never called. Not once. That told me everything I needed to know about her role in all of this. Some people don't apologize. They just disappear when control is gone. And honestly, that was fine with me. My mother didn't change. That was the part I respected the most. Same routine, same calm voice, same quiet control over everything she built. The difference was, now everyone knew. No more assumptions. No more, she doesn't understand. That door was closed for good. Ethan came by more often after that. Not because of the money, I could tell. It wasn't about that anymore. He'd sit at the table, talk to her, ask questions, real ones, about the past, about how things were built, about why certain choices mattered. That was the real inheritance, not the account, not the numbers, the understanding. And I watched that happen slowly, week by week, and realized something that stuck with me. The person who almost lost everything wasn't my mother, it was my son. Because money can be protected, legal documents can be rewritten. But the way people see you, once that changes, it doesn't go back. Daniel started showing up alone after a while. No big speeches, no dramatic apologies, just presence, helping fix things around the house, sitting longer, talking less, listening more. That was new. That was what mattered. My mother never brought it up again. Not once. She didn't need to. The lesson had already been delivered. Clean, complete, and permanent. One evening, a few weeks later, Daniel stayed behind after dinner. We stood out by my truck, same spot as always. He didn't look at me right away, just leaned against the side, hands in his pockets. I messed up, he said finally. Simple. No explanation. No defense. Just the truth. I nodded once. Yeah. You did. He exhaled slowly. I thought I was doing the right thing. I shook my head slightly. No, I said. You thought you were in control. That's different. He didn't argue. That told me he understood now. Or at least, he was starting to. We stood there for a few seconds. Quiet. Then he looked at me. I'll earn it back, he said. Not asking, not promising loudly, just stating it. I held his gaze for a moment. Then I gave him a small nod. Good, I said, because that's the only way it works. He nodded back. And for the first time since all of this started, it felt like I was talking to my son again. Not the version of him that walked into my house with a plan, the one I raised. I got into my truck after that, started the engine, and pulled away. Same road, same drive, but a different feeling this time. Not closure, not exactly. More like direction. Because some stories don't end with revenge. They end with people seeing exactly who they've become and deciding whether they're willing to change it. If you've been through something like this, or you've seen it happen up close, drop a comment and tell me what you would have done. And if you want more stories like this, real, raw, and closer to home than people like to admit, hit that subscribe button. I'll see you in the next one. A month later, things looked normal again. That's how it always is from the outside. Same house, same routines, same people showing up on Sundays like nothing ever happened. But once you've seen what's underneath, you don't mistake normal for unchanged anymore. Daniel was different. Not in a dramatic way, not overnight, but in the small things. The way he spoke slower, the way he didn't interrupt, the way he asked before assuming. That's how real change shows up. Quiet, consistent, and honestly, a little uncomfortable to watch at first. Because it means the person finally sees themselves clearly. Emily still wasn't around much. When she did show up, she kept her distance. Polite, careful. No more leading the conversation. No more subtle control. It was like watching someone step back from a role they didn't realize they'd lost. My mother never acknowledged it. Not directly. She treated her the same way she treated everyone else. Respectful, calm, unshaken. That was the part people always misunderstood about her. They thought strength looked like confrontation. It doesn't. Not always. Sometimes, it looks like standing still while everything else moves around you. Ethan started coming earlier on Sundays, helping in the kitchen, asking questions, listening more than he talked. That kid had learned something most people don't figure out until it's too late. That family isn't just about being included. It's about how you show up when it matters. One afternoon, I walked in and found him sitting with my mother at the table, a notebook open in front of him. She was explaining something, slow, detailed, patient. Numbers, decisions, why certain things were structured the way they were. He wasn't just listening, he was understanding. That was the moment I knew, whatever damage had been done, something better had grown out of it. Not perfect, not clean, but real. Later that evening, Daniel came out to the driveway again. Same spot, same silence before he spoke. "I've been thinking about what you said," he told me, "about control." I nodded. "And?" He looked out toward the street. "I didn't trust her," he said. "Not really. Not because she gave me a reason not to, but because I wanted things to be different than they were." That was honest. More honest than anything he'd said so far. I let that sit for a second. Then I said, "You don't fix that by taking control. You fix that by earning trust." He nodded slowly. "I know that now." We stood there in the quiet, both of us looking at the same road, thinking about very different versions of the same past. Then he asked something I didn't expect. "Did you ever think I'd do something like that?" I didn't answer right away, because that question deserved the truth. "Yeah," I said finally. "I did." He turned toward me slightly. "When?" "When you started listening to people who benefited from you not asking questions," I said. That landed, harder than I intended, but it needed to. He didn't argue, didn't defend himself, just nodded once. "That's fair," he said. And that, more than anything else, told me he was actually learning something from this. I got into my truck a few minutes later. Same routine, same drive. But this time, there was something different sitting with me. Not anger, not disappointment, perspective. Because at the end of the day, this wasn't about money. It never was. It was about what people are willing to do when they think no one is paying attention. And more importantly, what they do after they realize someone was. If you've made it this far, I want to hear from you. Would you have handled it the same way, or would you have cut them off completely? Drop your answer in the comments. And if you're still watching but haven't subscribed yet, you're part of that 97% people always talk about. Go ahead and fix that. I'll see you in the next story. There's something people don't talk about when it comes to family. Not the big moments, not the obvious betrayals, but the quiet ones. The ones that happen in conversations behind closed doors, in decisions made without you, in plans that only come to light when it's already too late to pretend they didn't exist. That's where things really change. Not in what people do, but in what you learn about them when they think you're not looking. I used to believe that if you raised your child right, if you showed up, if you did the work, that was enough. That somewhere along the way, all of that would hold. That they'd carry it with them into every decision they made. I don't believe that anymore. Not completely. Because people don't just become who you raise them to be. They become who they choose to be when they're tested. And sometimes, that test doesn't happen in front of you. Sometimes it happens in a room you weren't invited into, with a conversation you were never meant to hear. And that's the part that changes everything. Not because it breaks the relationship, but because it removes the illusion. After that, you don't react the same way. You don't trust the same way. You don't look at them the same way. You see them clearly. And clarity is a strange kind of peace. It's not comfortable. It doesn't fix anything. But it removes the guesswork. It tells you exactly where you stand and exactly what you're dealing with. And from there, you make a choice. Not about them, about you, about how much you're willing to carry, about what you're willing to accept, about what you're willing to rebuild, and what you're not. I didn't cut my son off. Some people would have. Maybe they'd be right. But that's not the choice I made. I chose to step back, to watch, to let him show me, over time, who he was going to be after this. Not the version of him that made the mistake, the version that came after it. Because that's the one that matters. Anyone can say sorry. Anyone can explain themselves. But not everyone changes. And change, real change, doesn't happen in a conversation. It happens in patterns, in consistency, in the small decisions nobody applauds. That's what I'm watching now. Not his words, his patterns. And maybe one day, that will be enough to rebuild something close to what we had before. Or maybe it won't. Either way, I'm not guessing anymore. And that, more than anything, is what this whole thing gave me. Not revenge, not even justice, just clarity. And sometimes, that's the only thing you actually need. If you've ever had a moment like this, where someone showed you exactly who they were when you weren't supposed to see it, I want to hear about it. Drop it in the comments. And if you're still here, still listening, still thinking about your own story, go ahead and hit subscribe. Because stories like this, they're not rare. People just don't say them out loud. I will. See you in the next one. A few days after all of that, I got a call from Daniel. Not unusual anymore. But this one felt different the moment I picked up. "Dad," he said. His voice wasn't hesitant this time. It was steady. "I'm meeting with a lawyer tomorrow." I didn't respond right away. Not because I was surprised, but because I wanted to hear what came next without interrupting it. "To undo everything we started," he added. "To make sure there's nothing out there that could ever be used against her again." That mattered. Not the words, the direction. I leaned back in my chair and let out a slow breath. "Good," I said. "Keep going." There was a short pause on the line. Then he said something I didn't expect. I should have come to you first. That one landed differently. Not heavy. Not dramatic. Just honest. Yeah, I replied. You should have. Silence again. But not the uncomfortable kind. The kind that means both people understand what's being said and what isn't. Before he hung up, he asked one more thing. You think she'll ever trust me again? I looked out the window for a second before answering. That's not your question to ask, I said. That's something you earn. He didn't argue, didn't push, just said, okay. Then the call ended. I sat there for a while after that, phone still in my hand, thinking about how close he had come to losing everything that actually mattered. Not the estate, not the money, the position he had in this family, the way people looked at him, the role he played without even realizing it. That's the part people don't understand. You don't lose that all at once. You lose it the moment someone stops seeing you the same way. Later that evening, I stopped by my mother's house, didn't tell her I was coming, never needed to. She was in the kitchen, same as always, like time didn't apply to her the same way it did to everyone else. He called me, I said. She nodded slightly. I know. Of course she did. He's meeting with a lawyer tomorrow, I added. She turned just enough to look at me. Good, she said. That was it. No praise, no reaction, just acknowledgement. You're not going to make this easy for him, are you? I asked. She gave a small, almost amused look. If it's easy, he won't learn anything, she replied. I shook my head slightly. That sounds about right. I grabbed a glass from the counter, poured some water, and leaned against the sink. You were ahead of this the whole time, I said. She didn't answer right away. Then she said something that stayed with me longer than anything else. No, Robert, I just didn't wait for it to happen to me. I looked at her for a second, then nodded. That was the difference. Most people react. She prepared, and that's why she never lost control. I left not long after that. Same quiet house, same routine. But now, everything was clear. No guessing, no assumptions, just facts. And as I drove home that night, I realized something simple. The people who try to take control of everything usually don't notice when they've already lost it. If you've made it all the way to the end, I've got one question for you. Do you think my son really changed, or is he just trying to fix what he almost lost? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now's a good time. Because the next story might hit even closer than this one.